Ireland, as the number of unemployed is close to reaching 3 million people here in France. But the outlook for young adults is looking particularly bleak, not just here in the country, but across Europe, as youth unemployment continues to soar to record figures. The Hollande government is now offering to pay most of the salaries of 100,000 young people hired next year in the hopes of driving down the country's unemployment rate. The pressure is on as the French leaders' approval ratings are beginning to tumble. But the question is, Hollande and his fellow political leaders up to the job to restoring economic security, or is this set to become a lost generation? With me in the studio is Thomas Klau, the Paris Bureau Chief of the European Council on Foreign Relations, André LEVY-LANG, the chairman of Les Echos, who also sits on many boards here in France, Itai, CELLIER, a young entrepreneur here in Paris who's having to let go two of his young staff, and Thomas HOUDAILLE from the Europanova think tank. I'd like to thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me. First of all, what I'd like to do is talk about the terms of the figures as such when it comes to young people and youth unemployment here in Europe, aged under 25. Let's just take a look at the statistics. In Spain, as you know, it's not just France that's in a dire situation. In Spain, it's 51%. Same figure for Greece. In Italy, it's 36.6%, while in Germany, it's only 7.9%. They're not good figures, are they, André LEVY-LANG?
They're terrible. They're terrible, and everybody knows the reasons for that, for these numbers. To be brief, flexibility is one thing, especially in Germany, including apprenticeship and a number of ways of getting into the workforce. Two, training, education. We have a fairly high proportion of young people who come out of school and cannot read or write, or very poorly. So we have a real problem in education. Most of Europe does, but we are especially in a poor position. So that's the second reason. The third reason is demand, of course. If we had growth, we would have more jobs to offer. So these are the reasons. I do some teaching at Dauphine. My students, I really have no major problem getting a job. I know many people also running companies or consultants or who have problems finding the right people. I have a friend who runs a large technical company in France, one of the large tech companies, major one. He tells me that in a few years he'll have to bring in engineers from India, not because they will be cheaper, same price, but just because the supply isn't there. So we have a real problem here on the supply side as well. So everybody knows it, but the solutions are long-term, most of them. When you change your educational system, it takes years to pay off. So I hope that this government will try to take some decisions which will have also some long-term positive effects. But that's the real challenge.
Thomas HOUDAILLE, I see you're itching there to say something.
Yes, because once again, the problem is growth. So we just, there is flexibility, taxes, and this is about structural reform that has to be done. But the real issue that is not today, it is partly in the debate, and the last growth figures of yesterday have been commented. France is at 0. The forecast for next year are going to be reduced. All the Eurozone is at 0, a bit less for the last second trimester. So this is the situation. We are in an economic crisis. Unemployment won't be reduced without growth, so we can try to optimize at some point. But the issue is how do you produce growth on the short term? And of course, this is very difficult, and it's all about what is the European plan, what's the trust we can give to the different stakeholders, because when you have trust, companies will recruit, and for the future, they will have a vision, and then you have, of course, all the mid and long-term measures regarding flexibility, competitivity, but this will take years, so we need to make this balance and to invest much more than what was announced by the last European Council.
Itai, CELLIER.
In terms of finding personnel and training, I yet again can give a concrete example. We are looking for a web developer, and they're virtually impossible to find in France. I mean, there are people who do web development. Most of them are autodidacts that just did it themselves. There are barely any places in France where you can actually learn this and get you can get a degree in web development, in data architecture and such, but it's very hard to find them. We tried virtually every engineering school in France and asked for majors and people who just got out of it. So most of the people we got were interns that didn't know much anything with web development in PHP, MySQL, what we were looking for, and the persons that we actually did find were either freelancers because they understood that actually they can gain more just by being on their own account, or simply too expensive. We had to pay around 1,000 euros a day of work, which is completely ludicrous. Whereas in Romania, you can find them everywhere. In India, you can find them everywhere. So what could I do? I mean, I need web development. I can't afford those prices, so I just go to the places where when I can actually afford it. It's Romania and India.
Thomas Klau, just how much behind the 8 ball are European leaders in addressing unemployment?
Well, I mean, LEVY-LANG has, I think, mentioned a huge problem in some countries, which was decades of underinvestment in education. And one key reason for that was the fact that our political systems collectively did not respond to the fact that, that they did not respond to the elephant in the room, which is that the profile of the youth generation to be educated was changing dramatically, with a large percentage, very large percentage of the young people, of the children, coming from poor families where French, in France's case, was not the language spoken at home. And this would have needed far more teachers, far smaller classes, and all of this didn't happen. But there is more, and there are more recent failings, I think, and Spain is a good example. I mean, the degree of recession which Spain is now going through, and these absolutely staggering unemployment figures, are, I would argue, also the result of misguided policies decided both in Madrid and collectively, under German influence, I should add, in Brussels. And the fact that today's European leaders and Eurozone leaders still haven't been able to put an end to this very dangerous and destabilizing Eurozone crisis, which we're now going to the third year of, and therefore have failed to restore confidence, investor confidence in the Eurozone, both from external investors and internal investors, is a major factor behind the situation we're in today.
So is it too late?
No, it's not too late, but it's high time, and the house is on fire. Unfortunately, so far, I still don't see sufficient imagination, courage and resolve to act collectively at the Eurozone level, and to give, for instance, the Eurozone the kind of instruments of government it really would need to address this crisis.
The fireman is sleeping.
Can I just make a quick remark and a question to my neighbor, because it's also in your title a question of generation, of this last generation. And I've been discussing with different, in particular business leaders, more than political leaders, that are really concerned about this, saying that they have been living in a different situation, they have been enjoying, and basically they are also responsible for the situation today. So don't take it personally, of course, but how do you see this question of generation responsibility, and how today you see the actual leaders responding to this specific transgeneration issue?
I mean, have they, Andre, been slow off the mark? I mean, the reality is the only countries that seem to be needing workers these days are China, Brazil and India. So what are we supposed to do with our young people here in Europe? Are they supposed to ship off to Mumbai and
Germany
Beijing?
needs also workers.
Or Germany.
I think there are lots of things which can be done without waiting for Eurozone to solve its problems. And we have tendency to always say it's somebody else's fault. It's globalization, it's the Chinese, it's the European Union, it's the ECB. Okay. Let's get back to the things which can be done. the things which can be done is improving the educational system. And it's not just a question of money. It's a question of organization and structure. And this is when we spend a lot of money on education in France with very poor results. We know, many people know what can be done. More freedom to the local management of schools, Anyway, things can be done without waiting for a miracle from outside. Let's put it this way. Okay. Now, I know many people who do things. They find engineers. Well, this young man across the table does it. Maybe he will get some work done in Romania, but that's all right. His company can go on and succeed. So I don't think it can be done this way. I don't think you can look at it by saying it's somebody else's fault, including the older generation, because we clearly had bad policies in many areas for a long time. In Europe, we know that. But again, waiting for an external solution is not the answer.
It has to come from within. But the reality is, Thomas Klau, in Europe, and I would say this as an outsider coming from the New World, as an Australian, is one thing that strikes me is the lack of initiative, the ability to sort of solve problems, as Andre was just saying, instead of just blaming others.
Well, that's a rather sweeping statement, and without wanting to sing the praises of the previous German government. But, for instance, if you take the case of the red-green coalition in Germany that was in charge about 10 years ago, they engineered very drastic reforms, very painful reforms, which a socialist government, in fact, did, and which really changed the parameters in Germany. And that's a very good... And look at some of the new member states. Who've been through horrendous crises of adaptation, very tough, very painful socially after the collapse of the Soviet system, and some of whom went through another crisis and who are now doing spectacularly well, or at least well enough. So that shows that reform is possible, that initiative does exist in Europe. It doesn't happen everywhere, it doesn't happen sufficiently. And I would argue that, yes, a lot of things need to be done at home, but at home today is also the Eurozone, maybe even Europe as a whole. So what we need is a multi-layered approach. And I think both for reasons of a lack of political will and imagination, but sometimes also because we are lacking the instruments, the institutional instruments that are necessary to tackle the crisis, we're far from doing enough.
Nothing like a sweeping statement to provoke a good response. But, Thomas, you've brought this back to the issue about the need for greater political harmonisation within Europe to make every nation stronger. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to be happening at the rate it should.
I don't think it does. There is a realisation now that you need a lot of instruments, far stronger banking supervision. You need stronger political authorities at the centre to manage that part of economic policy that needs to be managed together. Because, of course, what this Eurozone crisis has shown us that the troubles can start with the weakest link. Nobody took the problems in Greece seriously. Everybody said, it's such a small economy. What can happen to us because of what happened in Greece? Well, that was a huge eye-opener. But the process of building the instruments of government we need is not moving fast enough. And that is a big problem. But meanwhile, of course, a lot can be done in individual member states. We must hope that this socialist government learns from the examples that, successful examples elsewhere, and does reforms that maybe a centre-right government couldn't do in that way. Let's wait and see.
Itai, CELLIER, as a result of all the problems that you're having, are you rethinking about your future in Europe?
Well, actually, yes. I mean, I can't lie. We do think maybe somewhere else it would be better. I mean, for startup companies, it's known that the US and Israel are the best places. Silicon Valley and Silicon Wadi, as they call it in there, are the best places to actually thrive. But the problem is that normally entrepreneurs tend to create business in the place where they are, because they want to basically use the resources and the connections that they already created in the area. So it's very hard to say, like, okay, let's wrap everything up and go somewhere else. We have been thinking, about those things, and now recently, because we started to create a new initiative in the UK, we actually discovered that there's another side to Europe. I mean, when the UK Prime Minister says, like, I will take all French entrepreneurs with wide open arms, he meant business. He does mean business, because we actually know about several kinds of schemes that actually are there to give us what they call a soft landing. Actually, one of the schemes is called soft landing, and it's made basically for those kind of things. And we see now, in comparison to France, the UK is paradise. I have less taxes to pay. It's easier to hire because, okay, they also have a high rate of unemployment in several sectors, but it just makes everything much easier. We have a better understanding, and the mindset is also different. The
two Frenchmen here on my right, I'd like to ask you: do you despair for your country?
No, of course not. I made the choice to come back to France from the US at one time, twice actually. So I don't despair. I do despair from the governments in France for the last 30 years, I must say. I hope they will react, because we might have a lost generation. Actually, it's not going to be a loss for everyone. The most active ones will emigrate, will move. They will go to the UK, they will go to the US, they'll go somewhere else. And who will be left are the ones who cannot do it. So that is the real danger for France. No, I don't, of course not. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Thomas?
We have a very, I would say, strong turn to make, but we have, we have everything in France, in Europe also, but France is one of the best countries to live in the world. There is a lot of energy, opportunity. We need a bit, as we was discussing before, also a spirit of entrepreneurship at all levels. And I think this will be part of the solution. But no, we have to be optimistic, and the future is in front of us. We have to make it.
I'd like to add just one word. I think the real challenge is the Eurozone. I think we are really facing a major challenge. In other words, if the Euro doesn't survive the present crisis, I mean, just not survive for 1 or 2 years or 3 years, survive for a long time. If it doesn't, then it's Euro. It's Europe which will suffer. So I think that the challenge is for the whole of Europe, really. France will manage. France will do, because we have resources. We're a rich country. We have with people who are active, intelligent, creative. So I'm not worried about that. But if Europe as a whole breaks down, that is the real danger.
Well, let's hope for the optimistic outlook. At this point, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank my guests here tonight. They are, of course, Thomas Klau, Andre LEVY-LANG, Itai CELLIER, and Thomas HOUDAILLE. And coming up is our daily business wrap with Catherine Nicholson. Do stay with us here on France 24.